the nerve to withdraw from all.
Great Grand Rising, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you are prepared for an adventure, for a journey. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for accepting this invite and sharing space and energy and time with us. This is going to be a special presentation titled Rising Through Adversity, Cultivating Optimism for the Future, featuring Carleton alumni Komal Minhas. My name is Jamaal Jackson Rogers. I'm a poet, performing artist, arts educator, and also the co-owner of the Origin Arts and Community Center here based in Ottawa. I just completed my term as the artist in residence at Carleton University, a role which I am so privileged and honored to have taken on for the 2020 winter term. I'm pleased to be here with you today as the host and MC for this virtual event, which is actually hosted by the Carleton University Alumni Association. It's great to see such a positive turnout of people. Last I checked in on the numbers, we had 150 people verified to tune in today or more. And here we have over 50 people tuning in. So very thankful for your presence. We're comprised today of Carleton alumni, students, faculty, staff, as well as many members of the Ottawa community. While the COVID-19 crisis has kind of restricted us and confined us to our homes and our personal spaces, especially during these times, we want to find out how to connect. It's such an important time right now to find out ways to connect and go through the adversity together. Through opportunities like this virtual event, Carleton is showing its continued commitment to building connections and dialogue on important issues within our community. Before we get started with our formal programming, I'd like to go over a few logistical details so that this goes as smooth as possible. First thing is, please note that this event is being recorded and will be posted on the university's website as well as social media platforms for public viewing. All participants' microphones and cameras are off, so you don't have to worry about having your voice or face during the live recording. However, we will have them turned on when you need to ask a question or when you're spotlighted to ask a question during our question and answer period, as well as the breakout sessions that we will have after the formal presentation from Komal. I would like to take a moment to recognize, of course, the smooth neo-pop sounds of music that you were listening to. They are from the duo Mac and Bren, whose music you heard playing during the opening credits. Mackenzie and Ben DeMillo are siblings, and they're Carleton grads and have been making a name for themselves as performing live musicians throughout the Ottawa area. The music you heard is from their newly released mini EP titled These Walls. It's available for purchase on Spotify as well as other streaming platforms. I'd like to also give a shout out to the event support team in Instructional Media Services who are providing all the amazing technical support for today's presentation. Also, of course, a deep thank you and gratitude for the event organizers, the alumni engagement team in university advancement. So thank you again to Mac and Ben and all the organizers that put this event on and gathered these people together today. So today's presentation, let's keep it going. We're going to have Komal Minhas, who is a resilience educator and an interviewer. By sharing with us her life experiences, success, and challenges, Komal will provide us with some insight and strategies for finding the strength, courage, and capacity during these transformative times to create an action plan for the next step in our lives. This is an important engagement to me, if I could touch lightly on it, because as a person of color, finding ways to accept and understand my purpose in this time and how I can step into growth is really important, because during the socio-political times, I'm trying to find ways to create, but also manifest an expression of mine that is respected on an equal platform. So I want to make sure that I'm letting you know that myself and Komal being the MC and Komal being the main presenter, this is kind of like, got to give a shout out to Carleton University for stepping up and being representatives of diversity and inclusion, as well as opening the doors for a discussion to be led by two people of color. And this was actually planned before the COVID and before the uprising we see within our social communities now. So shout out to Carleton University for doing the work and stepping up. To get us started, I want to make sure that I give thanks, gratitude, and I make mention that this event is being held on Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, also known as Ottawa. And I want to make sure that we understand that we must pay recognition and stand in solidarity with the Indigenous communities in this city of ours, but of course across the nation, and support them as much as we can with their endeavors to liberate themselves and have equal footing in the social spheres of our nationality. So thank you to the Indigenous people for being here and cultivating the land, and we want to do a better job of supporting those communities. To get us started, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Alan Thompson to introduce our keynote speaker. Professor Thompson is going to introduce himself, so I'll take it away and pass it over to Professor Thompson.
Thank you, Jamal. Yeah, it's a real honor for me to be invited to introduce, if she needs any introduction, Komal Minhas. Komal is a host, an interviewer, investor, champion of women around the world. She's a cancer survivor, chronic illness advocate, and through her talk show Lessons Learned, she leverages her varied and difficult life experiences to deeply connect with her guests. A recent career highlight for Komal was interviewing Michelle Obama in front of an audience of 8,000 for Michelle Obama's Canadian Stadium tour. In 2016, Komal produced the documentary film Dream Girl, and we screened it here at Carleton. Dream Girl is about inspiring and ambitious female entrepreneurs. The film premiered at the Obama White House and landed Komal on Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100 list. Komal is now launching the next right step, organize your mind and life. Through this online resilience building program, she'll conduct interviews, facilitate workshops to help participants create a holistic blueprint for the next steps in their lives. Stay tuned for more details on that this summer. And I guess what makes me the most proud in making this introduction is that Komal is a graduate of Carleton's School of Journalism and a former student of mine. She is, in a word, amazing. And Komal, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Alan. I just want to name right off the top that the context, as Jamal shared, within which this event was supposed to happen has completely transformed since the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing protests, riots, uprising that it has been necessary to bring to the forefront anti-Black racism in the world and specifically in North America. And with this, Carleton has also, various departments have started doing that inward search within themselves and have their own reckoning. And Alan, we wanted to chat a little bit off the top here to address and name the call outs and call ins that the Black, Indigenous, people of color students from the J School, current and alumni, made to the program. And after speaking with yourself yesterday and students from the collective yesterday, I realized myself that this institutionalized racism within the J School has been happening for decades, but it really came to the fore last year. Can you share a little bit about when that came to light for the school more publicly, because there were students who have been talking about this for decades, and how that led to the faculty and administrative response to the BIPOC students and their call out?
Yeah, I mean, this is a time of reckoning for our journalism program, as it is for a lot of institutions. And a week or so we saw a really eloquent and devastating critique of the experience that many BIPOC students have had here at Carleton. This is not new. This is something that we've, I guess, in a way, always been aware of, not mindful enough of. It really, I think, personally came onto my radar screen a year or so ago when a former student of mine, a young Black woman, Atong Atur, wrote a piece that documented her experience as a Black student in Carleton's journalism program. And that piece essentially went viral and triggered a process at Carleton. We reached out to BIPOC students. We invited them to establish a committee that they would lead, that we would interact with, that we would engage with, and start to try and make some progress to address these concerns. By definition, a committee is a bureaucratic organs, so this has taken some time. And I know the call to action that came out last week, there was some frustration there with the time it's taking to make these changes. So as a school, we have launched sort of an initial plan of action, things that we are committing to do as we continue to listen and to talk and to engage. We're going to do things like we're creating a new academic chair in journalism, diversity, and inclusion. This will be a full-time post where someone will teach and conduct research. We're looking at all of our courses, all of our curriculum, and asking faculty members to use a checklist that we're going to devise, how to be more mindful when choosing your readings, choosing your topics, selecting guest speakers, that we're addressing these issues. This is a beginning, and I know there will be frustration with the time it's going to take to make some of these changes, but this has been a reckoning. We've heard this, and we're trying to bring about some change.
I remember vividly in my second year of university in the program, sitting in one of my second year journalism classes, and we were talking about objectivity in news. And I realized in that moment, and I talk about it in keynotes, and until this came to the fore, I didn't realize the real rooting and why this was my reaction was I knew I couldn't be objective. Because as a racialized person, my experience in and of itself, it cannot be objective without suffocating my own voice and suppressing my own truth. And so we heard a lot of the BIPOC students share that in the call to action. And seeing the swiftness of the response from the school was absolutely very positive for us as alumni, as BIPOC students. And we know that there is so much more to do. Even having students self-select and be on a committee again, puts that onus on the BIPOC students to create the solutions when there are experts and folks who hopefully not only the journalism program, but departments across the university will think to bring in as diversity, inclusion, and belonging experts. And I am looking forward to this reckoning to continue. And we talked about this yesterday, Alan, that it's going to get harder. The call outs are going to be louder. Until this trust is rebuilt and these actions are taken, not just in the journalism program, but across the university. And it was just so deeply rooted and necessary for me to create space to address this at the top of this conversation, because I can't talk about why I'm a resilience educator without talking about systemic racism. So thank you, Alan, for holding space for this. We know you have to head to your faculty meeting. So thank you for making time for introducing me and for this dialogue. And I really look forward to holding the program accountable as an alumni and alongside supporting the collective of students who did come forward. And I hope that they do have that opportunity to hear an apology and to hear more about what the next right steps are. So thank you, Alan.
Great, thanks very much.
All right, so part of the labor that comes with being a racialized person is that at times we do have to do more than we may have signed up for. And in this case, I was coming in to talk about the post-pandemic life and how we can, as individuals and communities, step up and really figure out how do we organize our lives moving forward? How do we make the most of, for a lot of you recent grads, the next right steps in our lives? And in the midst of this, we are facing the epidemic of anti-Black racism. And it's something that is at the forefront, and our feeds and Instagram and all those different things might be normalizing, but it is our responsibility as citizens, as humans, to continue this anti-racist work and to embed it in how we move forward. And when I thought about the roots of resilience, what I've come to learn about resilience, so much of it I've been seeing in action in the world with protesters who are on the streets, with Jagmeet Singh in the House of Commons yesterday, calling a racist or a Bloc Québécois MP racist when he did not unanimously vote for the motion that was in place to look into the RCMP's systemic racism. That level of courage, that level of rooting in our identity, of being able to speak up and out, to call in and call out right now, is rooted in a deeply meaningful capacity for resilience. So now when we are looking at this for ourselves as individuals, at an institutional level, when we're looking at resilience across Carleton campus, as we just spoke about with Alan, hard conversations are at the core of resilience work. We can do hard things. This is something that I've had to come to learn through very personal and traumatic experiences myself. And when I was going through those experiences, I realized there's something here. When I was at my lowest lows throughout my career, because you heard the shininess in my bio, I got to interview Michelle Obama on stage last year, being able to be on Oprah's Super Soul 100, a number of these very prominent, wonderful, shiny things. But on the flip side of those things was being diagnosed with and surviving cancer, surviving a neurological illness, moving through being gaslit by a white co-founder, and also traumas that come from losing loved ones and so many other things that we face in life. Through this colored experience that I've had in my life, this roller coaster of a ride, I began to see patterns of how I started to come through those hard things. And it was validated in research as I started to look more and more into things, and now am enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania in their positive psychology certificate program to understand more deeply the roots of resilience. So to begin, we need a shared understanding, a shared definition. So what is my definition of resilience? Resilience to me is finding the courage and confidence to speak your truth and feeling supported when you're speaking that truth. It's having the tools and systems to navigate life with meaning and purpose. When grief, loss, or trauma hits our lives, it's feeling capable of moving through the pain and discomfort, knowing you will rise eventually. Resilience is cultivating joy, even through adversity. In the Webster's Dictionary, it is learning to bounce back quickly after adversity hits. And that is just a sliver of what resilience work is for me. Now, when I look at what's happening in the world, when I look at the protesters on the streets, when I look historically at movements that happen at mass scale, such as the one that we are in right now, there are various pillars that I call the roots of resilience that are required for us to move through hard things. And today we're going to touch on 3 of those. The first being wellness. The second, self-efficacy and identity. And the third, community. So join me as I share with you my personal stories about these 3 pillars of resilience and share with you some reflections for you to take back so that you can implement and further deepen your understanding of these various roots of resilience. And at this point, I also want to shout out that my team created a workbook for you to move through these various pillars of resilience as well, that you get to reflect on after this session or have open with you right now in order to work through it while we're speaking. So let's talk about wellness. Audre Lorde said this: caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. When we hear self-care, we think bath bombs and a lot of surface level things. The self-care industry has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And that surface level self-care can actually, then it can do good. And when I look at the roots of self-care, when I look at the Black Panther Party and making universal health care a part of their demands, and when I look at the social infrastructure that during this pandemic has shown us the overall positive outcomes of countries that have solid social safety nets, that have solid social policy to support our communities. When I look at so many of us who have had to apply for CERB or for student support from the government and having that option as Canadians, meaningful self-care and wellness is deeply rooted in the structures and systems within which we are embedded. Now, at a personal level, I break down self-care and wellness into 2 areas: psychological self-care and physical self-care. Now, you might be wondering, how did this become a pillar in my life? I often wondered that too, because I would hear when I was younger who on campus would be pulling all-nighters. I was like the 2 or 3 all-nighters a week kind of student. I am a night owl by nature. I would go, crush out multiple 12-hour days, both in university and when we were building our startup, Dream Girl in New York City and Brooklyn. And I didn't fully understand why I had to prioritize my physical and psychological well-being until I hit a breaking point. As I shared, that film, Dream Girl, was a film about female entrepreneurs. We showcased the story of 4 or 5 women of color and their journeys with building their own businesses. Our ethos was, we know the names of Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, but who are the female founders? What are their stories? When we began the journey in 2014, it was before all of these female entrepreneurship movements had begun. We were on the front end of that curve. And I mean, my love for documentary began on campus at Carleton. And it was something that's followed me ever since. So to get into documentary film was my dream. So to build that film was incredible. We had the highest of highs, our premiere at the Obama White House that we worked so hard for, being named to Oprah Super Soul 100, which was such a validation of our work, being around peers who we admired and looked up to so much. I got to stand behind Ava DuVernay and not freak out. It was truly incredible. And as I shared, simultaneously facing a cancer diagnosis, going through multiple surgeries. The same month that we premiered at the Obama White House, I had my first surgery to remove the cancer from my body. When we were at the White House, it was my first pain-free day. When I received that diagnosis, I had convinced myself that by committing to the movement of Dream Girl, it would heal me. By working towards the benefit and growth of this movement, for helping have more representation in media, for allowing more women of color to see themselves on screen, that would heal me. But what I had to learn a very hard way was that only I could heal me. Only I could take care of my well-being. Only I could decrease my levels of stress. And that without doing those things, I was not useful to anybody. Simultaneously at that time, I went through an experience of being gaslit by my co-founder. At the time, I didn't know what gaslighting was. I also didn't realize that I was groomed to be gaslit because I had grown up in an alcoholic household. But hindsight is 2020. And the reason I bring up gaslighting, and I don't often in my keynotes, is because so many racialized people right now are coming to terms with how they were manipulated either in the workplace, by colleagues, by friends. And this reckoning is another very powerful one for us to name, because the psychological implications of being gaslit are immense. And for me, it resulted in a total destruction of my confidence. It resulted in being hit with a neurological disease that was most likely triggered by stress. So this story, or these examples, I wanted to share with you because I woke up one morning, January 2017, and I couldn't see out of my left eye. Suddenly the vision was gone. So began the very fast journey of me moving my life back to Canada. Thank you, Universal Healthcare, so that I could get the neurological tests and everything I needed to rule out potential diagnoses. And it was during that time when I exited my startup, when I realized how much of my wellness was taken from me, how unwell I was during that time, and how much time I needed to actually give to myself, that I was able to start my recovery journey. And what that included was, and because of, I'm just going to be mindful of our time so that we can ensure we have a maximum amount of time for Q&A. I'm going to build in our next point, which is wellness and self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is our belief in ourselves that we can come through hard things. It is our belief when we go through adversity or a tumultuous time that we as a collective or we as individuals are going to see the other side, that we can make it through. And in that moment, when I woke up in 2017 with no vision in my left eye, and in the weeks that followed, this move back to Canada, I had a moment, there was a moment where I realized I had to choose that I could be well. I had to choose that I could change the trajectory of my stress. I had to choose that I would become better. And let me give you an example. I'm speaking to you now in this keynote. I am articulate and words are my favorite thing, and sharing stories are literally all I want to do with my life. At that time, I couldn't hold a conversation with more than 1 or 2 people at a time. If I did that, I would have dissociative episodes. I would experience vertigo. I would experience overwhelm. So cognitively, I thought I lost everything. I didn't know if I'd be able to keynote again, until I began systematizing my wellness, believing that I could potentially see some normalcy return to my life. And that happened through organizing and being on top of my doctor's appointments. That happened by organizing and being on top of my wellness appointments, massage, physio, eye therapy, all of the things. It also started by me pursuing actively therapy and coaching. And psychological well-being and maintenance of our psychological well-being can be a taboo subject, especially in racialized communities. But I would not have become well without prioritizing this in my life. And now if you look at the workbook when you have a chance, you're going to see that in the wellness section, it is broken into psychological wellness and physical wellness. When it comes to physical wellness, I also incorporated movement that I love into my weeks. Started with once a day, and now 3 years later, I'm up to 5 times a day. Focusing on physical wellness builds our physical resilience. And physical resilience is necessary as we face these traumas and hardships in our lives and just as we age. And if you don't believe me, listen to the Wonder Woman that is Michelle Obama. When I had the opportunity to interview her, we talked about fitness at length, and her focus in, well, I won't say moving forward, but in the near future, she shared that she's going to be focusing on encouraging more and more wellness and fitness activities in the Black community, and specifically with Black women, because she said if the heads of household incorporate fitness, solid nutrition into their households, it becomes a community-wide change. So when you're doing these things, when you're implementing these habits around wellness, psychological and physical, you are not only changing your life, you're changing the lives of those around you. So self-efficacy, let's talk about task-based planning. In my research, I learned that the likelihood of folks in New York getting PTSD post 9/11 markedly went down with the support of 3 things. One was self-efficacy and task-based planning. The second was giving back and finding meaning in their community. And the third was community support, the people that they leaned on. So when we endure and go through trauma, believing that we can make it through and getting organized about our next right steps is critical. Figuring out how am I going to give back to the world? How am I going to center my anti-Black racism in my life? How am I going to ensure that I'm moving forward policy or calling my MPs, demanding accountability, looking into active ways of defunding the police and refunding social services? What am I doing on a daily to ensure I'm giving back to my community? And who am I calling to make sure that I can be well and do well and that we can do well together? So moving from self-efficacy into identity. I was doing some research last night specifically on racialized communities and resilience. And one thing that I learned, or a few things that I learned from Dr. Denise L. Brown's research showed me that specifically in African-American communities and Black communities, there was 2 major factors in increasing children's resilience and the resilience of young people. 1, community support, surprise. And 2 is actually racial socialization messages. Now, what does that mean? For those of us who are racialized, having pride in our identity, and even for those who aren't, having pride in our identity, knowing where we come from, rooting into our culture is a core determinant of resilience. Secondarily, having hard conversations with our children about race and resilience shows a marked improvement in our capacity to show up for hard things and hard conversations. So when we're seeing folks like Sasha Exeter talk about how she's talking to her daughter about race and about race politics and about being called slurs and about systemic oppression from a young age of 5, these are the core things that can allow young racialized folks to move forward with even more resilience in their life and to be supported by communities who aren't afraid to talk about the same things. Because what's better than being equipped for the worst case scenarios? Not being equipped. An example for me that comes to mind is when I was in 4th grade, I had an experience where I realized self-efficacy was important. And I was obviously 8 years old, so I didn't know it was called self-efficacy at the time. But self-efficacy was important alongside rooting in my identity. Turns out you can fail 4th grade. And I was on the path to failing 4th grade. And my teacher decided to intervene. And you might be wondering, what would make someone potentially fail 4th grade? Well, to give you context, I didn't have a lot of friends. My mom would come to school at recess to read books to me on the front quad of the school because I didn't have friends to play with and I would be bullied. And so she would bring books, we would read them together, and I'd head back to class. And so I started to stop handing in class tests. And Mr. Callis, my teacher, reached out to my mom. And as you can imagine, as the daughter of South Asian immigrant parents, when my mom gets a call that her daughter is starting to fail her class, things got real. And I remember coming home from school that day and my mom telling me to just go into the basement where we hung out, the kids hung out, and I wasn't allowed to come upstairs until many hours later. I was playing with my brother, doing whatever I was doing. She brought down a snack for me to have, but she just needed some time to think. And that weekend, my brother and my mom intervened, and they created an action plan for me for my next science test that was coming up on Monday. So we studied all weekend. I don't remember the subject matter because who remembers anything from being 8 years old? But what I do remember is writing that test on Monday and running home after school when it was graded and banging on my front door and having my mom open it frantically, wondering what happened, and showing her the test and it being in the 90% range. Me saying, "Ma, look. And she says, "What did you learn, Komal?" And I said, "If I work hard, I can do anything." Self-efficacy. And then she said, "Yes." And always remember that because of who we are, because we are a family that is not the same as others around here. We lived in Grand Prairie, Alberta. We were one of a few racialized families. You will always have to work twice as hard to be just as good. Identity. And having hard conversations about the realities of our identity with our kids. Key tenet of resilience. Because that conversation, though it might sound like, oh, did that take the wind out of that moment? No. It equipped me to know that if I continued to work hard and work that much harder, I could excel. And I did. And it wasn't until my crash and burn that I talked about when we talked about wellness that I realized I have to be really healthy in order to do these things, because my parents didn't sacrifice all that they did in order for me, their daughter in her 20s, to become so unwell. So this resilience journey is just that, a journey. But these key pillars of wellness, self-efficacy and identity, and community are key tenets of it. I unfortunately don't have time to dive further into community, but I think we can all agree that the more we know and can lean on the people in our life, the communities around us, and can have hard conversations, can know we can turn to them during our hardest times, that we are so much more supported. I will share one short story before we head into the Q&A. My one of my fiercest examples of community was actually on the Carleton campus. I remember in first year university, finding a lump in my left breast when I lived in residence and going to on-campus medical services and having them do a breast exam and booking me for a biopsy. I was 18 years old. I had just turned 18. I lived halfway across the country from my family, and I walked alone from campus health services to 4th Stormont. And I will always remember that walk because the isolation I felt, the loneliness I felt, and the fear I felt were so immense. And I went straight to my best friend to this day, Heather Page's dorm room. And she shared with me about an organization that she established in high school, which we talked about before, the Relay for Life. And so we took that moment together and a few years later started the Relay for Life at Carleton, because we knew that if that was my experience, and I fortunately did not have cancer, it was a non-cancerous growth that I had at that time. The cancer came later in my story. If that was my experience on campus, then there were hundreds of others going through the same thing. And if we built a community around the shared experience of either being someone who is supporting someone going through cancer or having it ourselves, that we could feel so much more supported going through our university experience together. And here we are over 10 years later, over $1 million raised, over thousands of students being engaged in Relay for Life, and that legacy lives on. Community is so important to our collective resilience. So I just want to reiterate these 3 aspects of the roots of resilience. Wellness. What are you doing to stay well psychologically and physically during this exceptionally challenging time? Self-efficacy and identity. How are you rooting into who you are? Because I also promise you, to the white folks who are watching, if you deeply dive into an analysis of your values, of what you stand for, who you are, where you come from, who your parents were, what they stood for. What about those values you do align with or don't? When you get clear on who you are going to be able to show up in your anti-racism work so much stronger because you're not going to be worried about what you're not. Self-efficacy and identity and community. With these three pieces, we become so much more resilient. And I want to say there's undue amounts of stress that we are all going through right now. So be gentle with yourself because we are not at full capacity. Psychological stress is significant. There was a statistic that I read that in communities where Black men and women are murdered by the police, the trauma can be felt secondarily for up to 3 to 4 months after the actual incident. And so if we look at this collective trauma we're all enduring and living, don't be surprised if this lingers for a long time. But do lean back on these roots of resilience because I know in my heart of hearts, because I've lived it, because I've come through hard things, that we can do hard things. Thank you all so much. I have gone over time, but we are about to open up for questions and we're going to bring Jamal back to help moderate that piece of things.
Thank you very much, Komal, for that wonderful, engaging, and insightful presentation in the keynote. I learned so much. I felt tapped into to everything you were saying, except for I couldn't relate to having a neurological disorder, but I can relate to having incredible amounts of stress. And of course, I feel like a lot of people can relate to those stories of stress or hitting a place in your life where you had to make a crucial decision to prioritize yourself. So thank you very much for that insightful and wonderful presentation. Deeply appreciate your roots of resilience, the three foundations there, the pillars. So we're moving into the question and answer period, and just some logistics for this. I will aim to answer any of the chat questions in chronological order. And for the video audio questions, please use your wave function. So you have a wave icon, you can wave, and we have people who are going to bounce those questions to me. You can do your questions through chat, so you can actually type the questions in, and I will relay them to Komal for you. So I will speak them to Komal and she will respond. Or you can ask the question by yourself, and you can use the audio or video. Just make sure to unmute your mic. And if you're doing video, allow yourself to be seen as well too, to access your video icon. So and also,
before we jump into that, Jamal, I just want to try one thing, because when we're in person, we get a lot more audience engagement, right? We get to like feel the vibes. So something that I saw done at a previous event is this. I want everyone get up to your keyboards and think of this. What was your, like, what landed so hard for you? And you can use one word or a couple words. What is the thing that you are chewing on most from the stories I just shared, or what came up for you most in just a couple of words? Line it up in the chat box. And when I count down from 5, push enter. We need everyone to participate, as many people as possible. It's the only way that this works. So ask yourself, what am I chewing on most right now in just a few words? And push enter to everyone in your chat box in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Wow. I'm just gonna read some of these out loud. I can do hard things. Wellness. Meaning of self-care. Psychological wellness. We have to work harder to be just as good. Gaslighting. Self-efficacy. Rooting in who you are. Self-care is not just bath bombs. Like, praise emoji for that one. You can believe that normalcy will return. Doing the next right thing. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing this. This gives us context into what you're rooting most into. Back to you, Jamal. Thank you for letting me try that exercise.
Wonderful exercise. Do we have your permission to use that in our future exchanges?
Absolutely. I borrowed it from another keynote that I gave from the admin on that side. So absolutely. Importance of fitness in the Black women's community. Yes, absolutely. We lost you for a second there, Jamal.
Are you here?
I am here.
Excellent. So I have a question coming in from Yibsira. Yibsira is asking about dismantling. What suggestions do you have for dismantling the conditions that racialized people have been, I guess, groomed, as you said, or conditioned under to feel that they have to work harder to be seen as equal. So for example, like I even personally related to that too, where this idea of resiliency, it seems like that racialized people have learn that from an extremely young age to be, so these to dismantle value, because that is exhausting.
Yeah, I honestly am continuing to do this every day because there's two parts to this truth. One is, I wish that wasn't true. And then the other part of it is true. Because when I look at certain things that my white co-founder had access to or was highlighted as, and myself as a racialized co-founder, as a South Asian co-founder, the shadows that I existed in, just in that dynamic, made so abundantly clear to me. And at the time, I wouldn't call it a racialized experience because it was pre-2016. So 2016 to now has awoken me to so much of what it means to live in a brown body. And as a South Asian woman, I have significant privilege. So as Black folks or Indigenous folks, that feeling is amplified even more. So the decoupling and sort of the transitioning of this in our minds, for me, has come so much through conversation and so much through talking about it with other folks, talking about it with people who are like me. And to be honest, really diving into Instagram and finding people with similar identities to me who are talking about similar things, or actually in the Black community right now, because a lot of the work that the Black community is doing, a lot of the truths that they're sharing about their own experience is helping me reflect on my own identity. So it's doing two things. It's allowing me to have deeper empathy and understanding of the Black lived experience without ever being able to claim that I know anything about like the truth of it, but I can relate to certain aspects. And then it also triggers in me my own realities. Like I said, I never really talked, coming out of 2016 into 2017, not only was I recovering from a mass physical illness, from cancer survival to the neurological illness, but emotional manipulation. I never used to talk about that because I had fear around naming that about my white co-founder, but that's my truth. So the more we can feel like we can fully express our truth to the people around us and they share their experiences with us, together we can build that plan of action forward to how to decouple and like retrain ourselves. So something I also want to say before I move into the next question is I'm going to go into gallery view because I want to see your faces. So if some of you feel comfortable actually throwing your cameras on, that would be so great because I'd love to see you. And if you're up for raising your hand and asking questions live, I want to hear from you. We're all in this very intense, strange time together. And so seeing you and hearing you is going to help me so much as well. So, oh my God, I love seeing all your beautiful faces. Hi, welcome again. So if whoever wants to raise their hand, let's talk it out. Some of
So
you
we
look
have,
so cozy. Sorry, Jamal.
It's okay. Thank you, Komal. We have a hand raised from Shivani. Shivani, so if you wave your hand, that means you're willing to speak. So go ahead, Shivani, and connect with Komal.
Hi, Komal. I just wanted to start by saying that whatever you said today was very powerful. As a person of color, I think during this time, it's very important to like kind of trust yourself in this process. And I think my question is, we talk about educating the younger generation, but how does one go about educating the older generation? So my parents are also people who grew up in Sri Lanka, who also might think a certain way. So not even just for this topic, but for any topic, it is sometimes hard to have these conversations. So how would you kind of go about talking or educating the older generation? And also just how do you educate in general? Like how do you educate this topic?
So one of the things that I love about journalism school and being trained in journalism is we're taught how to ask questions and active listening. And most people we're so frantic in our minds or in our fears or whatever it might be that we don't know. Sorry, I'm going back to gallery view because my face is just big in the center of this screen and it's distracting me. But we don't know how to ask thoughtful questions. And sometimes when we ask a question, it is to elicit a really aggressive or specific reaction. And so my story, my truth, my husband is a white man. We've been together for 12 years almost. We met at Carleton. When we moved back to Canada, we moved in with Mitch's dad. So we live here in Carp with my father-in-law and our cousin Nathan. So I live with 3 grown, amazing white men. But last night, things kind of, and we have really hard conversations every night at the table. We are constantly talking about race, about how we engage with these things. And my father-in-law is turning 62 next week. And so last night we were having a conversation and I was sharing about how this is a keynote that I've had to put so much more work into, just even understanding what's happening at the journalism school, ensuring that I'm engaging with the collective of students meaningfully, with the administration of well, and being able to succinctly talk about that massive problem in the first 5 minutes of this keynote. So as I'm talking about that with my family last night, Pops chimes in when we're talking about a specific stat around racism. He's like, actually, I read this. So in that moment, I completely disengage because I'm like, is that what you're holding on to in this dialogue I'm trying to have from a larger context around race? And I shut down. And so the conversation continued and continued and continued, and I had completely kind of stepped out of it. I'm really good cognitively at just like, I zone out. Boys, you talk about whatever it is you guys want to talk about. I'm here, but I'm not really here. And as I got up to leave the table, my father-in-law just hugged me. He embraced me and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I want you to know that I'm doing this work. And that article was written by a woman of color. And I am doing it to learn for myself, not only because you want me to. But in that moment, like that's what came to my mind because I'm learning. And that gesture of human connection and it being rooted in us loving each other and lovingly having these hard conversations and being okay with me dissociating earlier and it being kind of aggressive at some points, but then us coming back to it being about our relationship and our mutual love of each other helped us move through that. So when I look at talking to my parents, because my dad is actually a city councillor back home in Grand Prairie, Alberta. So when we're talking about him as the first South Asian, the first person of color to be a city councillor in Alberta when he was first elected almost 15 years ago, and him still having people criticize his accent, and him being a city councillor in a city that is actually like at the top of missing and murdered Indigenous women, the women who are missing in the country. Yeah, I've had to have a lot of interesting and tough conversations with him. But I also become aware of like when I can't do that labor with the adults in my life. But the biggest thing I would say is reminding them that this matters so deeply to you from a heart-centered level. So to take it just from stats, figures, and whatever to like, as humans, like Papa, when you immigrated to this country, you cut your hair off. As a sick man, you shaved your head because you wanted to fit in and you had fear of being othered. Using those shared experiences to help build empathy towards the experiences of the communities that you're trying to build that link for them cognitively is really helpful. That's what I would suggest, is just like bringing it back to the heart space. And also, sometimes I do just throw stats because I'm feeling spicy and I'm like, hey, actually, like, you need to know this. And I keep hammering it in and I keep telling them, I'm not gonna walk away. We're gonna keep having these hard conversations because I love you. You're gonna have to keep listening. So standing my ground and continuing to build that muscle, because this is something else in resilience work. Competence leads to confidence. So the more competent we feel about engaging with something, the more confident we are in ourselves and as a society in facing that thing. So a lot of people right now are like, oh, I'm getting called out. I'm being called a Karen. I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna ghost. It's like, no, keep engaging. Get comfortable with being called out. Get comfortable with being wrong. Get comfortable with learning something new. and we can move forward more holistically. That was a long answer, but obviously something that's close to home because it just happened last night. Oh, I can't hear you, Jamal, for some reason.
Thank you, Komal. My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now?
Yes. So we have time for maybe 2 more quick questions, and then we'll go to a breakout room, and then we'll come back. So the next question would be, it was a question from Lara. It says, your presentation was so powerful. You've accomplished incredible things in your life. Along the way, did you ever experience fear or crippling self-doubt? If so, how did you overcome that and continue to propel yourself forward?
Okay, so everyone go to the bottom of your bar and hit reactions. And I want you to put a thumbs up if you've ever experienced crippling self-doubt. Yes, all the time. And it is something that I think is a universal experience. Something that I've learned is that a lot of in my therapy, I've learned that a lot of my self-doubt is rooted in a lot of beliefs that I built up when I was younger, and that I'm working through those things. Things like, when I did move from my 4th grade potential failing to becoming valedictorian in 12th grade, excelling really messed with some people in my life, and I lost friends and I lost relationships and I lost people. So that often made me think that something was wrong with me and the way that I worked and the way that I wanted to be in the world and the goals that I had. And I would have and have so much anxiety when it comes to actually trying to be who I want to be in the world, trying to fully live into my identity. But what really helps me with that is, again, what Queen Brene Brown has taught us is that light dissolves shame. And what I mean by light is naming it with someone you love and trust and continuing to always talk through it. The other thing that I've gotten really strong about in my mind is starting to build positive self-talk habits. So I'm 100% that person that a few months ago when the pandemic started saying affirmations to myself in a mirror. Like those little kids that we see on Instagram videos and on Facebook videos, I'm sitting there saying, I'm living the life of my dreams. I am deeply rooted in my culture and identity, and my voice is my power. These are the things I say to myself in the mirror almost every morning now, because I understand that especially when we're in confined spaces, in quarantine, and when it was winter months, our psychological space is the most important real estate. And keeping that high and keeping that vibration, and I say vibration because I'm rooted in Eastern philosophy as a brown person. So I'm not saying it as a woo-woo human. It's actually partly very deeply rooted in my identity. That higher level vibration and energy that we have cognitively goes a long way throughout our days. So when it comes to crippling fear and self-doubt, I'll also say competence leads to confidence. So when we start any new skill, any new endeavor, as recent grads, as soon to be grads, you're gonna suck for a while. It's gonna be hard. You're not gonna be good at the thing for a while. But then if you look down 3 years, or if I look back at myself a few years ago, I'm so much more confident in certain skills because I put in the time to build my competence. And sometimes taking our emotions out of it and just saying, hey, I'm actually just not good at this thing yet, but I'm gonna keep working to get better, can diminish those feelings of self-doubt and anxiety, because it's oh wait, this is a neutral experience. I just have to keep doing it to get better at it. And that helps me a lot. So thank you for your question.
Thank you, Lara, for the question. I hope Komal was able to satisfy such a deep and perspective question from yourself. One that, of course, many of us agree with, self-doubt, and moving through it. We have another question. Our question comes from Stacy. Now, Stacy asked the question about gaslighting, that you brought that up and your experience with it. So Stacy wants to know what she should do because she has recently been gaslit in her work. She left her job and she felt that there's some guilt around self-care there. So Stacy's question is, how did you deal with being gaslit at your work in your life? And do you have some recommendations for moving through gaslit and also identifying when you are gaslit?
Big question. So I'm going to send you to resources, and I will ask you wonderful humans who are in front of screens where you can actually type, because I cannot. My friend Avery Francis wrote an article about this recently because she was gaslit by her white female co-founder. And she shares tips in that article of how to come through it. So if you Google Avery Francis Medium and throw that in the chat box, I would so appreciate that, whoever can do it first. And then another woman, Carolyn Purcell, Karlyn Percil. She worked in the banking industry as a Black woman for so long on Bay Street. And she was in an institution that not only was gaslighting her, but exhibited institutional racism. And she left that industry years ago and has built her career now on enabling people to now become anti-racist as an organization, but also to come back from this kind of challenge and manipulation. So with those two things shared, if anyone wants to share Carolyn's Instagram as well, much appreciated. I will say this. The insidiousness of being gaslit makes it so that you don't realize it's happening. And that is the power of emotional manipulation and narcissism. And this came from me being able to name it, let me tell you, has taken me, again, 3 years. So it's not like there's a quick fix to this. What it comes from is understanding how healthy relationships work and how we are meant to be treated. And for me, the biggest thing was there would be moments when I would deeply fear being around this person. And then there would be moments when we were so good together. And it was like those moments where we were so good overshadowed and made me think something was wrong with me when the bad moments would come up. I will also say we have hit noon. So if you have to go, head out. I hope the admin is okay if we go over a little bit. I would also like at this point to just get a sense of, if we were to do a 5-minute breakout room, are you interested? Thumbs up if you want to chat with each other. If you're not feeling it so much, we can continue with Q&A. So reaction, thumbs up if you're feeling a breakout, and don't feel obligated. I see no thumbs up.
Well, Komal, if I may.
Yes.
Administration is recommending that to keep with time that we skip the breakout room. However, you are our guest today, our privileged guest. So if you are about it, as we say in hip hop, we love, you can decide on whether you like the breakout room to happen or not.
Okay, what I will say is let's keep to this question. And we also have a poem coming from Jamal to wrap us up. So we'll do one more question once I wrap up this one on gaslighting. And then if you want to join me over on Instagram, I'll go live after this so that we can chat for a bit. So if you're interested to jump over to my Instagram, Komal Minhas, I'll go live so we can keep the conversation going and have our own mini breakout. But in the meantime, being gaslit, super messed up, hard to recognize when you're in it. If you think you're in it, you're probably in it. Check out Avery's article, look at Carolyn Purcell's work. And what I will say to your specific situation is once we come out of those things, there's a book called Option B, and it's by Sheryl Sandberg. And she very suddenly lost her husband when they were on vacation. He went to go work out at the gym and then had a heart attack on the treadmill. And what that made her realize, she worked with a man named Adam Grant, who is a psychologist. And I read a section in that book that changed me after that experience with my ex-co-founder. And it said that not only with grief, like when you go through massive trauma or grief, which being gaslit is, your confidence is shot. So where I talked about competence leads to confidence, your competence is slowly being eroded at by this other person. So when you walk out, you don't believe in yourself. It took me 3 years to build my confidence back up to think I had something to give the world, guys. After all of this, I also came to that impossible self-doubt, self-loathing, like self-destruction. And so you thinking that you should have stayed because of this continued unemployment, that abuse was obviously enough for you to leave at that time. So don't second guess that decision, and also give credit to the fact that we're in a pandemic, that hiring is different right now, and that it's okay to take this little bit of time to continue to build your physical and psychological wellness. So when you do go into your next workplace, you are so equipped to not allow those behaviors to happen again. That's what I would say to that specific situation. So we'll do one more question.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Raise a hand. Raise a hand. I want to see someone's face.
Perhaps. Okay, looks like maybe Nyla. Is it Nyla who had a question about, or Nayla, sorry, about family? So Nayla, would you like to ask that question through audio and video? Because Komal would love to connect with you.
So you can use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen. And if not, that's totally cool too.
Okay, so no raised hands, but I'll because we're working in chronological order, just to let you know, I'm going to go with Nayla's question next. However, it's important to know that Komal did say she's going to go on her Instagram and do a live connection with you so that you can further and deepen the conversation with her and answer more questions. So the final question for today's gathering is from Nayla. She says, thank you for your powerful presentation. How do we navigate family when it comes to setting boundaries and living our own truth? What if living your truth impacts your family's health and their reputation? How do we deal with this?
Okay, story time, short story time. My husband is white. It took my family, my mom specifically, 5 years to meet him, say his name aloud, and to engage in our relationship and not even just approve of our relationship. So we've been together for 12 years. As a South Asian woman, this is something I feel deeply when it comes to our choices and the impacts that they have on our family. But I am also so aware of how detrimental it can be to live a lie. And that the reckoning and the hardship that the family might feel is 100% something you can work through. So Mitch and my mom are like thick as thieves now. Like they are very good with each other. My mom sees how caring Mitch's family is because often it's the fear of the unknown, the fear of the other side of your decision because they haven't either been exposed to it, experienced it, or they're worried about reputation. But if you as their child can show them that this is your decision rooted and based in integrity and you knowing who you are because they raised you in a way to know who you are, just know that like it might be hard for a while, but if this is truly what you want in your life, you can do the hard thing. And you can work through that. Like the night that I told my mom about Mitch, she like stopped talking to me, tried to get my dad to and family to disown me. And at the end of that trip, before I went back to Carleton, I wrote her notes and hid them all around her car, the house, her makeup bag. Because when I told her the decision, I said, I'm not asking your permission, but I wanted to let you know because lying to you is not who I am. And so me not even allowing it to be that angry kind of interaction, and mind you, like it hurt a lot of hurtful things were said. But I knew if I took care of my pillars of resilience, if I was doing the things I needed to be healthy, that I could keep approaching this challenge over time. And it was actually my cancer diagnosis that brought our family together because my parents came to Ottawa and had to see firsthand, got to see how loved I am by my white in-laws. And so it was great. That was a big silver lining of a very unfortunate cancer diagnosis, but we can do hard things, guys. You know what's best for you. And no one else can convince you otherwise if you lean into these different aspects of the roots of resilience and really honing into your own identity. It's gonna be scary, but if you know it's right for you, you can't change that truth. Thank you everybody so much for your questions, for your engagement, for your beautiful faces and smiles. I'm so happy I get to see so many of you. I am very excited. So what I wanted to do before actually I introduce or throw to Jamaal to read his poetry, something I wanted to do, and I'll be very upfront about this, is when everything happened after George Floyd's murder, and I came to realize like talking about resilience during this time could be challenging as a brown woman taking up space. I felt this need to pass the mic. And it was friends of mine who reminded me that this is why I do this work, that being an accomplice, being an ally is deeply embedded in who I am as a person. And so I want to take this time to say thank you, Carlton, for making space for me as a brown woman, for Jamaal as a Black man to take up space for us all today. But that we got to keep doing it. You got to keep sharing our stories. It's got to continue to be elevated in this way. And it might seem token at first, but over time it's going to become normalized and just a part of our culture and identity, because we are Canada. We are a very multicultural place. I want to continue to see so many of us at the forefront. Some grads who I am proud to call folks that I went to school with, friends, acquaintances, Vicky Mochama, a national voice in Canada who shared such a powerful account of her experience as a Black woman in the Globe and Mail last week. Eddie Ndopu, he is the United Nations Secretary General, Global Advocate for Sustainable Development Goals. He is a disability advocate, a graduate of Carleton, who is taking over the world. Kulani Adamek, the Yukon Regional Chief. She was someone who helped me so much when I was on campus. Kim Brunhuber, who I don't know personally, but just was hired to be a CNN international anchor after being the CBC LA correspondent in California. These are our grads. These are people who went through this institution. Let's keep elevating melanated voices, and specifically Black and Indigenous voices. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you so much. Enjoy your workbook. Do that workbook. I promise you, you will feel more equipped for everything we're going through right now. And to finish today's session off, here is Jamaal reciting the poem, Medicine.
She said, "Our diversity is our medicine." She said, "Our diversity is our medicine, gathering all the beauty in the world in one unifying sentence." And how could I challenge her? When I have sampled a taste of utopian togetherness, trading in a lens of ignorance for a culture of multiple expressions, narratives, and languages when I was younger, I never spoke about how intense I studied the human condition. My earliest memories begin with my father's Guyanese shoulders embracing my mother in moonlight shuffle, as if they had memorized a legendary routine from a champion figure skating couple. When he would halt his waltz, kneel to the ground, and tuck us in under blankets that warmed our bodies from the cold floor, hoping to make sense of complex emotions, shown by world travelers and Globetrotters that would eventually settle on Canadian soil, watching moments of contemplation flash like brainstorms, only to transform into revolutionary actions, actions that would ultimately alter my understanding of what it feels to know when one is home. Those were the days when we first arrived to Ottawa, shelters becoming natural habitats, until this glowing city of growing capital helped us back on our feet. In these days of decades past, I would meet faces attached to stories that carried history from all across Earth's marvelous landscapes. It was on Elmira Drive and Irish Street where I crossed cultures from everywhere. I found lodging in the communities that shared the same longing as me, spoken in a language of triumph and resiliency, witnessed in the silent pride of a Cambodian man's smile, who hides the pain of all that he and his wife left behind to find new hope in a country that promises a better life. He shows no teeth, but his grin is chin high and his eyes beam with glory, as if the future told him that eventually it would all be worth the journey. A language that reflects the ancient family lineage recited from a Somali mother's call for her children, playing chase in the twilight of August Eve as if tribe and sibling had the same meaning. She sings out names from the corner of her mouth like I've never heard it before. Samatar, Abdi Fattah, Muhammad, Nasra, and all at once I can taste the camel milk flow from the Horn of Africa, sweeping peninsulas to exotic islands in the Caribbean where Haitian diasporic doorsteps played zouk and compa, and elders' hands fry fish and chicken drumsticks, sizzling stoves blowing smoke through windows that would eventually invite auditory senses in a euphoria of nostalgia and hospitality. When the Creole escaped their throats, you can hear the resilience still chanting freedom songs from the motherland, mixed with the chance to start a new renaissance on the frontiers of a liberated land. It didn't take much for us to celebrate the everyday, and when special occasions came, ceremonies ceremonies to honor joyous commemorations. We danced the Lebanese dabka as if it was taught to us through breath and lung rituals, to match the rhythm of the sacred lute and tabla, or at least watched in awe as people with the frames of goalposts dip low, then leap beyond whatever struggles their fellow country people face back home. All that I was searching for. From subtle sunrise, midday sunshine, and moving well beyond shimmering sunset could be captured in these intense interactions of harmonious rapture, a place where my heart could be embedded in the art of solidarity, and my understanding of our collective Canadian identity unraveled in that single moment of affinity when she said to me, "Our diversity is our medicine." I will never know what memories she carried beneath her skin that would lead her to share such welcoming empathy. An Indigenous elder woman who spoke truth beyond her own history of genocide that has robbed her of her rightful claim to reconcile home. Maybe it was her native traditions that reminded her that we are all one once we defeat the walls of ignorance and isolation. But in one unifying sentence, with wisdom beyond my experience, she showed me that if we ever want to know how deep and our beauty and empathy resides, we shall see it in the hope, the healing, the stories, the resilience that lies in a newcomer's eyes. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Thank you for your time and your energy, your questions. We want to give a shout out again, of course, to the Carleton University Alumni Association, a shout out to the event supports team in instructional media services, of course, to the alumni engagement team in university advancement, to Alan Thompson, and the wonderful, brilliant, and exceptional Komal Minhas. Give a round of applause, some snaps, some yoo-hoos, some smiles, warm hugs, and thank you very much for tuning in. Go on over to Komal Minhas, that's KOMALMINHAS on Instagram, and follow up with her with some more questions. Appreciate your time and energy. Go on and live your lives. Have a wonderful, beautiful day.
Thanks, everyone.
I don't understand you and where you got the nerve to withdraw from all